In chapter 3, Peter comes to the central point of his letter, the delay of Jesus' return. It is inevitable that scoffers and mockers will come. Christian faith has always had, at its core, things which the world finds ridiculous and foolish, whether it was the disgrace of the cross or the repugnance of the resurrection. But Paul, as we saw in 1 Corinthians 1 and 2, asserted that what is weakness in the world's eyes is in fact the strength of God, and what the world values as strong, God has rejected. He tells us that in fact something deeper is going on in how we perceive these things. Those who are being saved, as he puts it in 1 Corinthians 1:18, will see the cross and resurrection as the wisdom and power of God. But those who are perishing will mistake them for foolishness and weakness. It is not an intellectual problem in the end. It is a problem of will, of sinful pride, of idolatry and rebellion. Peter here wants to make this clear to his readers as well. It is not simply that some misunderstand. They scoff and they indulge their own lusts, as he writes in verse 3. And, as he puts it in verse 5, they deliberately ignore the fact that the Word of God created the world as well as flooded it. These people are not interested in the truth. They are not concerned about godliness. They might give every appearance of wisdom and intellectual ability, but it is fiction. They are not sincere. Remember instead, as Peter urges, the word spoken by the prophets and the commandment of Jesus spoken through his apostles. If then the word of God created all things and at one point flooded them in judgment, why is it so impossible or unlikely that by this same word God will bring all things to a halt for a day of judgment, for which the Lord will return? As surely as the world had a starting point, by that same power it has an end. And the end is a great conflagration. In the Old Testament, the day of judgment often involved fire, but it was focused on the destruction of the wicked. Here in 2 Peter, we have the only instance in the New Testament of the destruction of creation itself by fire. Naturally, some have taken this to mean that everything is destined for the furnace, and so there is little point in expending effort to either amass possessions or even to look after the planet. This view is bolstered by the understanding that our final destination after the day of judgment is heaven itself. This may be the case for those who have fallen asleep already, but the New Testament expectation is that after the day of judgment, heaven and earth will be renewed, as we ourselves will be renewed, and that God will be with us again as he was with Adam and Eve in the garden. We see this expectation in verse 13. Though when it comes to the end of the world, people sometimes either quote verse 10 or verse 12. But if there are those who miss the point about the future of creation, there are also those who miss the point about the nature and purpose of the new creation. Verse 13 also makes this clear, as Peter describes the new heavens and the new earth as a place where righteousness is at home. Again in verse 14, as he delivers an exhortation based on the promise, he urges believers to be found on the day of judgment without spot or blemish. This again draws the contrast between those who scoff to cover their sins and those who wait and prepare themselves for the great day. But it is worth emphasizing that the new heavens and new earth are not just a beacon for patient endurance, but for righteousness and purity. This entails our personal transformation. In 1:4, Peter talks about us becoming participants in the divine nature. And in the following 3 verses, he describes the qualities with which we must bolster our faith: goodness, knowledge, self-control, endurance, godliness, mutual affection, and love. We must resist then not only those who want us to doubt our hope, but those who want to distort it, who imagine a future prepared by God which compromises with sin.